What's up, you guys? I'm Dan. This is Frugal Not Cheap. Today we're going to watch and react to a video by Ramit Sethi called The Problem with the FIRE Movement. So many years ago, I discovered the FIRE idea, the financial independence, retire early, and it's something that I've been working for many years, at least over a decade. But every now and then you get personalities that have kind of a very different take on things. One of them that was very vocal against the FIRE movement was Susie Orman, I think I remember. One of the kind of embedded or hidden values within the FIRE movement, and especially behind early retirement extreme, so more like lean FIRE, you know, that kind of thing, less so the fat FIRE. Anyway, I've got a video about the different levels of FIRE. But one of the kind of embedded ideas is sort of anti-consumerism, minimalism, and really just not being kind of a super spendy pants type of person. And so that's one reason why I haven't really gravitated towards a lot of Ramit Sethi's content, even though he is a very popular personal finance personality. I have watched his show on Netflix, by the way. I did find it very entertaining. And, you know, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff that I would agree with as well. It's just there's a little bit of a different angle or take on the philosophy. So I think it'll be fun to watch this video and see what he has to say, see what kind of things that we agree with and what kind of things, you know, I don't agree with so much. We'll see. Okay, here goes.
FIRE. Financial independence, retire early. Those words sound great, right? Well, I have some problems with the idea of FIRE. You see, who doesn't love the idea of retiring early with complete financial freedom? It sounds great, but is it too good to be true? As a best-selling financial author who's helped millions of people get their financial lives in order, here's my honest opinion on FIRE. I'm gonna break this video down into 3 parts. I'm gonna tell you what FIRE is, the problems with it, and then I'm gonna recommend what you do instead.
Oh, already he's, you know, definitely firing some shots here, saying that we should do something instead. So we'll see about that.
Let's start with part 1. What is FIRE? Imagine one day you woke up in your 30s and you had enough money in your accounts to never work again. In other words, your investments
Oh yeah, so we're just going to wake up one day with $2.3 million.
were generating more money than your salary. I remember years ago going on TV to talk about my best-selling book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Before the camera started, the anchor and I were talking, and they leaned over. They congratulated me on my book, said, "Oh, great job. Do you have to work anymore?" And I sat back and I realized I'd never really put it that way, but no, I don't have to work anymore. And that was a powerful moment. It's an example of something called the crossover point, where your investments earn enough to fund your expenses automatically.
Hey, he's really stepped up his game in the last couple of videos with these graphics, I'd have to say. I'm really impressed with them. Most of his videos are more like this. He does this podcast, and it really talks about the dynamics of people in a relationship and money, and then a lot about their biases and mental handicaps that are really keeping them from achieving their goals. And it can be really interesting from that kind of psychological perspective, much less so from sort of like an engineering and you know, brass tacks perspective, which is really more my jam. Like it's refreshing and interesting to see the psychological stuff. It is important, you know, because that can prevent you from getting to actually doing the brass tacks type stuff. But, you know, mostly I've got more of an engineering type of mindset, I guess. But here, basically, the idea is that there's some point where our investments are going to be generating more income than our expenses, and so then we're financially free. I don't really know what the deal is with that income trend there on the left. I guess that's maybe like salary income. But then why are the investments rising even as the income is less than the expenses? Right on the very left, I don't understand that. So yeah, weird chart. Maybe you can let me know how that works in the comments below, because I don't get it.
And this idea was first described by Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez in their book, Your Money or Your Life. It's an incredibly influential idea in personal finance. Money makes money. And at a certain point, your money is generating so much new money that all of your expenses are covered. This is also known as being financially independent. And what can you do when you hit the crossover point? Well, at a minimum, you can do nothing. You can choose to work or not, because after all, you could spend the rest of your life spending down your investments. A lot of people call this retiring early. Together, That is financial independence plus retiring early, or FIRE. To break this concept down even further, there's lean FIRE, which is people who've decided they can live on a lean amount of money, often $30,000 to $50,000 a year in perpetuity.
Or lower, like Jacob Lundfisker spent a whole lot less in early retirement extreme.
They typically reject materialism. They embrace simplicity, often in an extreme way. They're likely doing fun things like going for walks in the park and bird watching. On the other,
All right, not to knock on bird watching and walks in the park, but those aren't the only kinds of free entertainment that we can do, and there's a lot of like fulfilling stuff that is relatively free that we can do or inexpensive. So yeah. Anyway,
end of the spectrum, there is fat FIRE, which is for people who want to live an extravagant life at the highest levels of spending. Think of flying first class, staying at the Four Seasons or Amman resorts, putting 3 kids through private school. You ever wonder, for example, how celebrities can spend $250,000 on a single party? That's
oof. I mean, it's really easy to spend a lot of money. I was talking to a friend the other day. I don't remember exactly how it came up, but we're talking about a large sum of money, like maybe, I don't know, $2 million or something. And she's wondering how, we could spend that, how someone could spend that, in a short amount of time. Just couldn't seem to wrap her head around how one would do that. And unfortunately, it's really, really easy to spend money, and it's much harder to save it.
It's because their money is earning so much money that they actually have to work to spend it all. For example, in 2018, Oprah bought a house for $8 million. Seems outrageously expensive, right? But keep this in mind. Her net worth at the time was over $4 billion. And if she just conservatively invested that money, generating 4%, her investments alone, not even counting her salary, would generate $160 million that year.
That's pretty cool. So he introduced the idea of the 4% rule, without really telling you what it is. But that's the amount that should last like a 30-year retirement, or in theory in perpetuity. That you could withdraw from your portfolio because it'll be growing faster than that, and then based on historical trends, it would work out. But one interesting thing about the Oprah deal that he talked about is she's buying real estate, so it's not like the money's evaporating. That asset's still worth something, and so yeah, it's it's actually even worse. Like, she's bought the asset, and yeah, she'll have to pay property taxes and maintain it and all this, but the asset's still worth something. So it's not like she just blew $8 million or whatever.
Effectively making the house free to her. Now that we know what FIRE is, let's break down the problems. Part 2, the problems with the FIRE movement.
Here we go.
Now, before we get into some issues here, I want to acknowledge the positive things about the FIRE movement. First,
okay.
I gotta say, I love the way that the FIRE community has raised the question of saving more money. FIRE is a total antidote to Americans' lackluster savings rate. Most Americans stretch to save 10%.
Yeah, and here I'll point out that, a lot of his guests are in the 6-figure income range. And so they have situations that are relatively fixable. He doesn't talk to people that are earning, like 50 or 40 or lower incomes like that, relative to his guests. And so really they're pretty spendy a lot of the times, his guests, and they don't necessarily need to be in the positions that they are. And so with some tweaks, they could really make some big changes.
FIRE absolutely obliterates that by showing it's possible to save 25, 40, even 70% of your income if you get clear about your goals. Second, FIRE demonstrates how you can take control of your money and live the life you want. I love that. A lot of people shared that they were initially attracted to FIRE by a blog post which explained how they could retire decades earlier than they thought possible. That's incredibly powerful. And third, some FIRE members have created a really meaningful life for themselves. I want everyone to be able to articulate your unique, rich life and then to use your money to live it. That's what money is for. But there are all
right, so before we go on, he's found 3 things. One, that we absolutely can save a lot more than living sort of the mainstream normal way. Second, he talked about agency, that we have some control over our destiny, Both of these ideas I really like. And then the third was about living a life with purpose and meaning. And so absolutely we can do that. That aligns very well with FIRE. Part of the main idea is to stop spending so much time on work, which, for many of us is more like a means to an end than a source of fulfillment. And if we really think about it too, even if it is fulfilling to some degree, it's probably not the most fulfilling thing that we could be doing with our time. I think it's kind of crazy that someone might not have the imagination to think about what they would do outside of work if they didn't have to work. There's so an infinite, set of possibilities of really meaningful things that we could be doing instead.
Also some problems with the FIRE movement, and I see it a lot. The first problem I see is that the FIRE movement is often obsessed with a number, and everything revolves around that. A lot of members of the FIRE movement exhibit classic signs of stress, anxiety, even depression, thinking that hitting some mythical number in the
Stress, anxiety, and depression is not something that I've noticed in, say the Mr. Money Mustache forums or just generally in the FIRE movement. If anything, watching the savings build and watching that passive income, well, I hate that phrase because, all those like gurus online are using it. But anyway, watching your dividends and the appreciation, the unrealized capital gains in your account and all that, if anything, that gives you a whole lot more breathing room or a feeling like you aren't stretched. So it's completely the opposite. I think it makes it much less stressful than life is when you're living on the financial edge. Absolutely. So, yeah.
Their spreadsheet will suddenly make them happy. And as we know from the tons of conversations I've had on my podcast, including all the conversations I've had with people over the last 20 years, it won't.
That's true. So I've seen a lot of his stuff, and a lot of the people that worry over money, they think when they hit some number of net worth or whatever that they're going to be happy, and of course it's not going to be the case. At the same time, though, because he's got all these high income type people that tend to do better, it really forgets the other side of things, I think, and that's one reason why I haven't really followed his stuff all that much is when you're living in poverty, that's extremely stressful. And if you're able to get to a point where you start to see all this progress and you get further and further away from being paycheck to paycheck, that's an incredible relief. And that's something that we absolutely shouldn't forget about. But I will grant that if you're just obsessed over, okay, when I hit X, in my net worth, all of a sudden I'm going to be magically happy and things are going to be great. Obviously not, right? It's really, happiness isn't about that. It's more about having a life that's full of purpose and love and meaning and all the good things in life.
The way you feel about money is highly uncorrelated to the amount in your bank account. More importantly, a rich life is not about achieving a number. A rich life is one where you wake up, you enjoy what you're doing, one that is lived intentionally, abundantly, proactively.
Absolutely. None of that is incongruous with the FIRE movement. In fact, the idea behind reaching the number is because at that point, you're able to stop work and shift your life over to doing all of those things and living that rich life.
Life is not some destination in a spreadsheet cell. A rich life starts today, even if you have debt. And it's living a rich life today and an even richer life tomorrow.
I like that, actually, though, the idea that we should enjoy the journey. So, I've got a video about the boring middle, and I've talked about it in some other videos as well. But we absolutely should enjoy the journey as well, and not just be looking forward to that day when we're finally going to FIRE.
Another problem is that people working towards FIRE often spend years living in ultra frugality. I'm talking hyper frugality, so that one day, in this mythical future, they can enjoy their money. But that's not how people work.
All right. So, I've got some older videos. You've seen my budget was very low when I was younger. And I tell you, I regretted exactly zero. Because the whole thing is he talked about living a rich life. Well, yeah, I didn't spend a lot, but I was really enjoying my life. I didn't need to spend a lot to enjoy my time with friends. And, I still went out to eat every now and then and, did all kinds of things, traveled. It's just, I did things optimizing for my income so that I could reach the goals that I wanted to financially. So I guess, yeah, there could be cases where you kind of go completely nutso and you're more on the cheap side or extreme cheapskates of things than being frugal. And I wouldn't want to do that. But I think he's trying to paint the picture like being very frugal is really missing out on all this stuff and kind of living in deprivation. And I don't see it that way at all.
I've seen this with guests on my podcast. Mindy and Carl, for example, who are actually quite prominent in the FIRE community, who in their early 50s built an over $4 million fortune. But as members of the FIRE community, they still struggle to spend their money. That's because when you set the goal of accumulating a number...
No. So there's also the point that we don't want to be wasteful. So, I mean, just because we could spend more doesn't mean that it aligns with our values. At least that's how I see it. So, yeah, they could, and I hope that they're not experiencing any sort of unjustified fear over spending more. Hopefully, it's more about does it align with their values to do those things.
It becomes very difficult to learn how to spend it. In other words, you can't be ultra frugal for years and years and then magically flip a switch and suddenly you are spending money. That's like saying, I want to make friends later when I'm 50. Or that's like a lot of Indian parents who tell their kids, don't date. Okay, you're 26, time to get married. It's like, what?
Well, it is hard to make sort of drastic changes, and that's a fair point. But you can make them over time. So, even for me, since moving from New Hampshire down here to Texas, I've really loosened up on my budget as I've started to realize that I don't need to keep my foot on the gas, and as I've found ways to spend money that do align with my values. Mostly just, more time with friends, and unfortunately, like, my friends like to eat out a lot, so I end up doing that. I try to do it a little bit carefully with my budget still. But I'm certainly not missing out on anything, and I'm having a good time. And then the other place I really loosened up was on rent in the place where I live, and working from home, and really just, I don't know, I don't regret it. I'm very happy in this place, but at the same time I view it as a big luxury, and if I had to downsize, then I could do that, and I know that I wouldn't really lose all that much. I'd still be happy. How fancy your apartment is not, I don't know, it's just not that big of a deal.
I'm missing an entire skill set here. You end up not learning the skill of spending money. And that is a skill, something that has to be learned in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. Of course you should save. Of course you should invest aggressively. I talk about that all the time. But you've also got to exercise that spending muscle now, because if you don't, it deteriorates. And in fact, you create new grooves that simply tell you the only right thing to do with your money is to accumulate it or even hoard it. And the third problem with FIRE...
I don't know about that. Certainly not in my family anyway. I think it really does come down to sort of values and not being wasteful rather than sort of this hoarding mindset, or that we need to keep accumulating. No.
Is that it's a movement that often valorizes how little you can spend. That becomes toxic. You can see it in FIRE forums where people constantly worry about money, even when millions of dollars in the bank. They often worry about what the community will say if they were to buy a nice car. I've had people on my podcast who have...
Well, that's dumb. I mean, one, that's Reddit. Reddit. not to knock, but yeah, okay. I haven't found it to be the most healthy community. There's a whole lot of sort of bandwagon mentality where everyone, I don't know. It's not a healthy place for discourse in what I've seen. It's kind of messed up. But yeah, I mean, there are going to always be some examples of people that struggle with this, but I don't think that's representative of the majority. Anyway, it's certainly not something that I think I struggle with at all.
Millions of dollars in the bank.
As you know, I drive a Tesla, and my car before that was relatively fancy. Like he says, or actually Ramit talks about this too, that living a rich life means spending on the things that you value and less on the things that you don't. And yeah.
They want to buy something nice, like a nice bag. But the question is, what would my friends say? And that demonization of spending within the FIRE community creates an unhealthy relationship with finances. If you want to buy something and you can afford to do it, I'm all for it. Now,
yeah, we shouldn't care what other people think.
Good news is that in recent years, there are more and more people in the FIRE community talking openly about spending money on the things they value. There are prominent members of the FIRE community who have come out, who have spoken about their struggles in spending money and their journey to be able to spend money meaningfully. There are other folks who have shared some of the things they've bought and how it has affected them in a positive, sometimes even negative way. There are conferences where FIRE attendees are now talking about the meaningful lives they want to create, not simply the amount of money they want to save.
We have to remember here, though, that those people are personalities that have derived an income out of their, the fact that they are media personalities, right? Like we saw Paula Pant, she's got her podcast, and of course she's got sponsors. Mr. Money Mustache has the blog, which I don't know what traffic is like these days, but it was generating a very significant income in its heyday, and it probably still has a pretty good income, generates a good income now as well. So these people ended up having really way more than they would have anticipated or needed, and so of course they're going to have a pressure to start to spend more. I mean, they're continuing to generate a lot of wealth, but that's not really representative of the average person who actually does FIRE and doesn't go out and continue to make tons of money in FIRE. And take me for example. Hopefully I'll be firing at some point in the future, and when I do, I've got this YouTube channel, but the income's very, very minor. It's never going to be, I don't think, a huge income generator. Certainly I don't have any plans to take on any sponsors, for instance. I have to be extremely selective about that. I just don't want to sell anything. This is a hobby for me. I just want to make good content that helps people, entertains them and informs them. And it's not meant to be a business, put it that way. It's also have a structure in order to protect me from liability, but it's not really meant to be a business.
Love that. That's a totally healthy development, and I'm a big fan of it. We don't want an unhealthy relationship with food, just as we don't want an unhealthy relationship with money. Money is not meant to simply be accumulated. It's meant to be thoughtfully respected, saved and invested, and yes, also spent. Before I get to the third part of this video, do me a favor.
Yeah, I mean, all that's fine. Again, he highlights a lot of the psychological type stuff. It's important too. All right.
Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. It helps this channel grow, and it lets me keep sending you new ways to think about money every single week. All right, that brings me to part number 3, how to achieve financial independence the right way.
Oh, and I will say I am subscribed to his channel on my own personal account. So I do every now and then like to check out the stuff.
Now, FIRE is not easy, and often you'll hear people who are not in the FIRE community instantly dismiss it. They'll say things like, I'm too young to think about that, or 50% savings rate, I can barely save 5%. It's interesting, by the way, the people who say I'm too young to think about saving and investing, just a few years later, you'll notice that they change and they'll say, it's too late for me to start. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and the best time to start is when you're young. So let's see what he's got to say about the right way to do things.
Often you'll hear people say, this beautiful chestnut, I'd rather spend my money now than nickel and dime myself for the next 30 years. Nobody told you have to nickel and dime yourself, but what about being thoughtful and intentional with your saving and investing? Of course, the real answer is that you can choose whether the crossover point is part of your rich life, and if you want to reach it, you get to choose how to achieve it. So how do you achieve financial independence? Like I mentioned earlier in this video, a lot of people in the FIRE community focus on saving a huge portion of their salary. Forget about 10% or 15%. A lot of them are talking about 40, 50, 70%. Let me give you an example.
Oh yeah, I did that.
Let's say your household income is $80,000. Your monthly expenses are $6,000. Theoretically, you could reach your crossover point in 38 years if you follow the usual advice of saving and investing 10%. Or you could reach it a lot faster. Let me show you with some real numbers. Option 1, you could cut your monthly expenses in half. Now, a lot of people are like, off, Ramit. You're telling me to cut my monthly expenses in half? Do you know how much it costs? Yes, I get it. It's expensive. But there are also a lot of examples of people in the lean fire community actually doing it. So let's...
Whoa, there's nothing lean about $4,000 a month, especially if you're single. With a family, college, all these kinds of stuff, depending on where you live, absolutely I understand that could be harder. But here in Dallas-Fort Worth, my apartment plus including the garage, which also pays for the electricity for my car, that's $1,900. And then, that's another $2,100 that I could spend on everything else. Very easy to do that. In fact, I could save probably at least a quarter of that still. More than that, I think. Yeah, easily so.
Let's just go through the process. Following this strategy, for example, you could reach your crossover point in just over 12 years. Keep in mind the trade-off.
Yeah, that's more like it.
12 years is really fast for a crossover point, but you've targeted ongoing spending of $36,000 per year every year.
Yeah, so I hadn't done the math in my head, but roughly I'm spending about $37,000 right now. So actually his example is my lifestyle, and it is, I do not feel deprived, I'll tell you that.
And that's quite low for a lot of people. In fact, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average U.S. household spent $72,000 in 2022. Let's take another option. Option 2, you could raise your income. Let's say you follow the advice in my book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and on my website to negotiate a 30% raise.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. He is a little bit more focused on the income side of things than on the saving side of things, which, is kind of more of the classical like fire stuff, is to focus on the saving side. But of course, playing both defense and offense is important.
If you take all that extra money and you invest it, you'd hit your crossover point in 22 years. Notice that this takes longer than option 1, actually a lot longer. But in this example, you've targeted spending $72,000 per year. That's much more in line with what the average US household spends, and you could probably maintain it a lot easier. Or option 3, you could do a combination
I don't know.
of both. If you increase your income by 30% and cut your spending by 30%, you'd hit your crossover point in just 9 years. That's
more like it, but I don't like the way that he's using kind of the mainstream way to do things as sort of the benchmark, because, well, I don't know, from the philosophy of generally the FIRE movement, like there's so much wastefulness in that kind of a lifestyle. And if you really start to, I don't know, just make sure that you're deploying your dollars where you really value, it can make a huge change in your spending. And but in general, this idea that maybe, there's a happy medium between ultra frugality, as he calls it, which in this scenario doesn't seem all that ultra to me, but anyway, and the mainstream, then yeah, obviously, there's a good happy medium that's going to be the best for the individual, right? So I would find what works best for me.
An extremely short time to your crossover point combined with relatively high spending. And that shows the power of targeting both your income and your expenses.
Helpful,
now remember,
for sure.
A lot of people don't think about their earnings and spending in this strategic of a way. And as a result, they do the same thing most other people do. They spend pretty much all they make. They save a tiny amount, whatever's left over. They end up working for decades, and then they find themselves ranting about taxes on Twitter without knowing what the hell they're talking about or
That's
what
funny.
A marginal tax rate is.
Yeah, definitely.
Do not
shouldn't
be that
living
person.
That way.
Please recognize you have the power to dramatically change the way you approach your working years. You can earn more. Learning how to increase your salary is a skill. You can spend less. The FIRE community has shown us it's possible. Or you can do both. You decide on your rich life. Let me tell you about my personal choice. I actually like the idea of spending extravagantly on the things I love. What do I mean by that? That
Nothing
means
wrong
that
with
I'm
that.
much
I talked
more
about that
aligned
earlier.
with fat FIRE than lean FIRE. I'm willing to work. I've built the skills to increase my income. I invest aggressively. I want to live in cities that tend to be pretty expensive. That is the choice I have made. But I'm not particularly interested in retiring early. Maybe I will, maybe not, but it's not a goal of mine. It's not something that I work really hard towards. I put money aside, I've set up money rules for myself, and I know the type of lifestyle that my wife and I would like to live. With that said, retiring early doesn't
So I wonder about that. Like, why is that for him? Is he at a point where he could stop? Why does he continue? Is it that he really likes to be this personality? Maybe he finds it really fulfilling that he's able to help a lot of people, because I do think that even though our philosophies are different, that he does. Like, it is a helpful thing to teach people about personal finance the way that he does. So I don't know. Interesting I'd be really curious to hear if you could really kind of dig deep on that one at some point.
always have to be part of FIRE. You can choose to simply become financially independent and then decide what you want to do. All right.
Yeah, and that happens with a lot of people they've been moving towards FIRE without really designing their life under RE. So they don't know what life is going to look like under early retirement. That can be definitely an issue for sure.
All right, now that you understand the different types of FIRE and some of the problems that I want you to be aware of, use this video to decide if going after FIRE is part of your rich life. If so, let me know in the comments which option you're going to use to achieve financial independence. Now check out this video popping up on screen to watch more.
All right, so that was an interesting video for sure. And I think you can see by the way that I talked about it that in a lot of ways I don't think that his views and the FIRE views are really all that opposed. There's a lot of overlap. But anyway, it's more fun if you kind of talk about things in a controversial way like that, I guess. What do you think? And are you working towards FIRE? Let us know in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.